Welcome to Cozy English. Tonight we are going back, not far for some of us, and quite far for others, to the years of growing up. Childhood is the country we all come from. No matter how different our lives become, no matter how far we travel or how much we change, those early years stay inside us, in the way we respond to certain smells, in the things that make us feel suddenly very young, in the particular shape of what we are afraid of and what we love. Tonight's stories are about those years, about school and summer and the first real friendship, about the confusing work of becoming a person, about the teachers who stayed with us and the moments we didn't know were important until much later, about the day something shifted and childhood was, without announcement, behind us. As you listen, let yourself rest completely. Let your breathing slow. The English is coming to you gently, settling into you the way memories do. Quietly, without effort, staying longer than you expect. Before we begin, if you haven't subscribed to this channel, please do. It helps us keep making these stories for English learners all over the world. Share us with a friend who is learning. We'd love a comment in the morning if something stays with you. Now, close your eyes. Let's go back. Story 1. Summer. The summers of childhood are longer than all the summers that come after. This is not a matter of opinion. It is a feature of how time works when you are young, when each day has not yet been sorted into the category of days like other days, when August is still a country you have not been to before and might not return to. The days of childhood summer are enormous. They contain whole weeks of the adult variety. Clara remembered the summers of her 8th and 9th year as if they were a single long summer. She and her best friend Jody lived 3 streets apart and spent the long holidays almost entirely in each other's company, migrating between their 2 houses with the ease of people who have ceased to feel like visitors. They built things. This was the primary occupation of those summers, or what Clara remembered as the primary occupation: structures and systems in gardens, a den in Jody's garage that they furnished with remarkable seriousness and that no adult was permitted to enter without permission, a catalog of invented games with rules that evolved as they played, that were never written down, that only the 2 of them understood. What Clara understood now as an adult was what she had not understood then, that what she and Jody were doing, in the den and the garden and the long unhurried days, was learning each other, learning how the other person thought and responded and played, what she found funny, what she found unfair, how to have an argument without ending the day badly. They were doing the invisible social education of childhood friendship, and they were doing it in August, in the sun, with the serious enjoyment of people who do not know they are being educated. She had lost touch with Jody in her late teens, in the way of childhood friends who move into different schools and different lives. She thought about her sometimes with the particular warmth of a person who shaped something important about you before either of you knew what you were shaping. She hoped Jody remembered the summers. She thought she probably did. Story 2. The Teacher. Mr. Okonkwo taught history to 12-year-olds, and he was very good at it, which was rarer than it should have been. What he was good at, specifically, was the question. He had a quality, patient, alert, never theatrical, of asking the thing that opened a topic rather than closed it. He did not ask questions that had answers. He asked questions that had more questions inside them. His students, unaccustomed to this, spent the first half of the term being slightly uncertain, and the second half being unable to stop thinking. Sam had been one of Mr. Okonkwo's students at 12, and could not have articulated at the time what was different about his classes, but had understood viscerally that something was. that the hour went differently from other hours, that it left something behind rather than simply ending. What he had asked in a class about trade routes in the medieval world was, if you could not read or write and you had never traveled more than 20 miles from where you were born, what would you believe was at the edge of the world? The class had gone quiet. Not the quiet of not knowing, but the quiet of actually thinking, which was, Sam later understood, an unusual quiet for a classroom to contain. Different answers had come. Dragons, water that fell away, more land, a wall. Mr. Okonkwo had written them all on the board with the same weight, the same neutrality, and then had said, and who was right, and what did being right depend on? Sam had thought about this question for years. He had thought about it in contexts that had nothing to do with medieval trade routes, in arguments, in professional disagreements, in the consideration of his own certainties and what they depended on. He had become, as an adult, a person who asked what information he was missing, who was curious about the edge of what he knew. He was not entirely sure when that had started, but he suspected it had started in a classroom at 12 with a man who asked questions that had more questions inside them. He had tried, once, to write a letter to Mr. Okonkwo. He had not known his first name or how to find him, and the school had been unable to help. The letter had not been sent, but he thought of him with a specific and lasting gratitude. The gratitude you feel for someone who changed something in you without either of you knowing it was happening. Story 3. The New School. When her family moved, Priya was 13, which was the worst possible age for it. Not the worst age in absolute terms. She understood, as an adult, that there were ages that would have been harder. Earlier childhood, when the dislocation would have been more complete, or later, when the move would have interrupted examinations. But 13 was bad in its own way. She had just found her footing at her old school. She had her people, a group of 5 girls who had formed over 3 years and who had the particular ease of friendship that comes from shared history. She had left them for a new city, a new school, and the first day of January term at a school where everyone had known each other for 2.5 years. The loneliness of the first weeks was very specific. She was not invisible, she was new, which meant people looked at her, took a position on her, asked the compulsory questions. She moved through the days with a performance of fine that she had not had to perform before and that she found exhausting. The person who changed it was not someone she had expected. She had expected, if things changed, that it would be through the girls in her class, the social center of the year group, the people whose acceptance mattered. Instead, it was a girl named Beth who sat at the back of the maths room and who had a quality of comfortable solitude that Priya recognized and envied. She did not seem to need to perform fine because she seemed genuinely to be fine. Beth had asked her, after maths, what her previous school had been like. Not as a social opener, as a genuine question, asked with real interest, in the tone of someone who was curious about people. Priya had answered honestly, which surprised her. She had said it was good, and she missed it, and she found this school hard to read. Beth had nodded, without offering the usual reassurance. I moved at 11, she said. It took me a full term. You're in the hard part. This, the naming of it as a hard part with an implied end, was one of the most useful things anyone said to Priya in that period. Not that everything was fine, just that where she was a stage, not a destination. They became friends. Not the same kind of friends as the 5 girls. Something different, something that had been built out of difficulty and honesty, rather than proximity and time. She stayed in touch with Beth for 20 years. through moves and changes and the long, uneven shape of adult friendship. She thought of that maths room sometimes, and the question asked in good faith, and what it had turned. Story 4. The First Job. He was 16 and the job was at a bakery, starting at 5:30 in the morning, and he had not understood, when he applied for it, that 5:30 in the morning was a place that existed for him. He had known it existed in the abstract. He had been awake at 5:30 occasionally, for early flights or because of illness, and he had experienced it as a time of passage rather than a time to inhabit. The bakery made it a time to inhabit, 3 mornings a week, and the inhabiting was the first thing that surprised him. The second thing that surprised him was the work. He was a teenager who had not, up to this point, been called upon to work in the way the bakery required. Sustained, physical, purposeful, with consequences if you did not do it well. The consequences were not dramatic. If he didn't do his part of the prep, the morning supply was short, and the morning was harder for everyone. This was a simple equation, but one he had not encountered before in any real form, and he found that it changed how he engaged with what he was doing. Not because he was altruistic. He was 16, he was not especially altruistic, but because the connection between his effort and the outcome was direct and immediate in a way that school had never managed to make anything feel. He learned things. He learned that pastry was moody and required attention. He learned that the baker, a quiet man named Gerald, had a memory like a detailed filing system and could tell, from across the kitchen, whether something had been done correctly. He learned that arriving on time was not the minimum standard but the beginning of respect. Gerald had said this on the first morning, without drama, in the tone of someone stating a fact, and that it mattered differently when the consequence was someone else's morning, rather than only your own. He worked at the bakery for 18 months, and then stopped when his school workload increased and the hours became incompatible. He had earned money, which was useful. He had also learned something he could not have named at 16 but could name now, the particular way it felt to do work that mattered, however small, and to do it well. He had been trying, in various forms, to find that feeling again ever since. Story 5. What he understood at 9. There was a summer when Marcus understood that adults did not know everything. He had suspected this for some time. He was 9, which was old enough to have accumulated evidence, but young enough that the evidence was still surprising. The summer had provided 2 specific incidents that he filed, without knowing he was filing them, as confirmations of something he was already beginning to think. The first was a family argument overheard through a floor. His parents, whom he loved, and who were generally sensible people, were having a disagreement that seemed, from the sounds of it, he was in his bedroom, they were in the kitchen below, to be about money and about something underneath the money that was harder to name. He had lain on his bedroom floor and listened and understood that the disagreement did not have a clear answer, and that his parents did not have one and were working without one. This was, he now understood, a completely ordinary adult experience. At 9, it was revelatory. The second incident was at school. His teacher, Mrs. Fleming, who he liked and whose authority had always seemed to him straightforwardly absolute, had made a mistake, a factual error in a geography lesson, which another student had corrected. Mrs. Fleming had looked at the student for a moment and then said, "You're right, I was wrong, thank you." She had said it without difficulty. She had moved on. This was also, he understood now, a normal adult thing and one done well, the graceful acknowledgement of an error, the absence of defensiveness. At 9, it had been the second stone in the new picture he was building of what adults actually were. What they were, he had slowly concluded, was people. Not people who had finished becoming people, just people at a later stage of the same process he was in. This was a simple conclusion and took years to fully arrive at. But the summer at 9 was where it started, through an overheard argument and a geography class and a teacher who said, "You're right, I was wrong, thank you." Story 6. Best Friends. The friendship between Aisha and Lena started because they were put next to each other in a classroom and lasted, in various forms, for 30 years, which was how some of the best friendships worked, by accident and then by choice. They were 8 when they met. Lena had moved from another town and was in the careful social posture of a new person, attending to everything, performing normality. Aisha had been at the school for 3 years and had a settled group and had, that morning, had a small falling out with someone in the group over something she could no longer remember, and she had arrived at her desk in a state of mild grievance that had made her, unusually, receptive to someone new. They had talked during the lunch break on the first day, and the talk had the quality, recognized later, not at the time, of 2 people discovering, with some surprise, that the other person made sense to them. This was a particular kind of conversation that most people had only a few times in their lives. They had it at 8, at lunch, in a playground, and neither of them went home that day with a name for what had happened. It was just a good lunch. By the end of the week, they were the thing people called best friends. The friendship lasted through school and through the different lives they went into after school. Different cities, different careers, the distinct shapes of 2 people who had grown up side by side and then grown in different directions without growing apart. They had long calls and occasional visits, and a thread of messages that ran through the years like a continuous conversation interrupted by the logistics of adult life. What Aisha said, at some point in their 30s, was that she thought of Lena as the person who knew her first self, the self before she had learned to shape herself for other people. There was something irreplaceable about that kind of knowing. Lena had said, "You know my first self too," which was true, and was the thing that held them, across the cities and the years and the different directions. Story 7. Growing Pains. The year Chloe was 14 was, she thought looking back, the year she was most unlike herself. This was a common experience of being 14, she later came to understand. The year when the self was in a particularly uncertain state, when the child version had not quite departed and the person you were becoming had not quite arrived, and what was left in the gap was a temporary version that was neither and was uncomfortable to inhabit. She had been, at 14, unkind to a girl in her class named Phoebe. Not dramatically unkind, not the kind of cruelty that could be pointed to and named. The quieter kind, the exclusion, the sideways comment, the look exchanged with other people that Phoebe would have seen and been meant to see. She had not thought much about it at the time, which was part of how it worked. It was easy not to think about because it was diffuse and social, and easy to tell yourself it was nothing. She thought about it a great deal in her 20s, when she had become, through the long, slow work of growing up, a person who was more interested in other people than she had been at 14, and the memory of Phoebe had come back to her, with a clarity that was uncomfortable. She had, in her late 20s, found Phoebe on social media. She had written a message that had taken her a week to draft, not because the message was long, but because the appropriate tone of an acknowledgement like this was something she had to think about carefully. She had not wanted it to be about herself, about her own guilt, or her own need for absolution. She had wanted to say, "That period was unkind, and I know it, and I'm sorry." Phoebe had written back, several weeks later, a brief and gracious reply that said she remembered things differently, that school was complicated for everyone, that she appreciated the message. Chloe did not know what to do with this reply, whether it was genuinely forgiving or generously managed, or both, or neither. She accepted it. She thought about 14 and the uncomfortable gap self and what it cost the people around you when you were in it. She thought about that sometimes when she watched young teenagers, the uncomfortable ones, the ones who were not quite themselves, and felt something that was not quite sympathy and was more like recognition. Story 8. The Bicycle. The bicycle had been a birthday present. It was red, which was what she had asked for, and it was the right size, which her father had apparently researched without letting on that he had researched it. She had been able to ride a bicycle before this one. She had learned on a neighbor's bicycle 2 years earlier, in the kind of afternoon that exists in childhood for the learning of specific skills, when her neighbor's older son had held the seat and run alongside, and then let go when she wasn't expecting it, which was apparently the standard method and which had worked, in the panicked and then triumphant way it always worked. But this was her own bicycle. This was different. She rode it on the morning of her birthday, up and down the road outside the house, in the particular wobble and correct that she had not quite lost over the 2 years without one. Her father stood at the gate. She could feel him watching, and found that she did not mind. The watching was part of the morning. The morning was complete. The bicycle gave her what bicycles give children: range. She could go further, faster, and could arrive places without the negotiation of "can someone take me?" She rode to Jody's house, which was a 10-minute walk, in 3 minutes. She rode to the park. She rode around the block and around it again, and around it once more, and the around the block became smaller each time, which was the effect of becoming able to do a thing. The thing shrinks as you expand. She was 41 now. She still rode a bicycle, not the red one. The red one had been outgrown and replaced and eventually lost track of, as things were. But she rode one, often, in the city where she lived, and sometimes when she was on it she felt something that was a remnant of the red bicycle's morning, the specific quality of going somewhere under your own power, the road and the air, and the decision to turn left rather than right. She could not have said whether this was memory or just the feeling that bicycles produce. She thought it might be both. Story 9. What teenagers know. The thing people forgot about teenagers, Diane thought, was that they knew things adults had unlearned. She had been teaching secondary school for 15 years. She had arrived at this understanding slowly, through classroom after classroom of adolescents who were routinely underestimated by the adults in their lives, who were described as difficult or self-absorbed or impossible to reach, when what Diane found, when she actually listened, was that they were people in a particular kind of intensity. They felt things fully. This was both the difficulty and the gift, the adult trick of managing feeling, of placing it in context, of knowing from experience that the thing you were feeling now was survivable because you had survived feelings before. Teenagers had not yet acquired this trick, which meant the current feeling was the feeling, without the frame of previously survived feelings around it. This was painful. It was also, Diane thought, a kind of clarity. Her students knew which teachers respected them and which were performing respect. They knew when something was genuinely interesting and when they were being managed. They could tell, within minutes, which adult in the room was honest and which was telling them what they expected to hear. These were not small kinds of knowing. They were exactly the kinds that adults most needed and most lost. She had a student this year, a boy named Danny, who had a specific quality of directness that made some of her colleagues nervous. He asked questions that were not rhetorical. He actually wanted answers. He said when he disagreed with something, not combatively but clearly, with reasons. He listened when the reasons were addressed. She had told him once, at the end of a lesson that had gone well, "You're going to be very good at something when you grow up." He had looked at her with the slight suspicion that teenagers applied to compliments from teachers. "What?" he said. "I don't know yet," she said, "but something." He had looked at her for a moment longer and then gone, because teenagers moved on fast from moments. But she had meant it, and she thought he had known she meant it, and the knowledge of being genuinely seen was, she believed, one of the things a teacher could give that lasted longer than anything else. Story 10. The Last Summer Before. The last summer before things changed was the summer Marcus was 17. He did not know, that summer, that it was the last of a particular kind. This is how last summers work. You are inside them without the knowledge that you are inside them. And it is only later, from whatever the next thing is, that you look back and name the summer as the last one. The naming happens in retrospect. It was a good summer. He and his friends, 4 of them, tight in the way of late teenage friendship, when proximity and shared history had reached a particular depth, spent it in the way of summers that had not yet been replaced by work, at each other's houses, in the park, at the swimming pool on the hot days, at the cinema on the rainy ones. They talked about the future in the abstract way of people for whom it was close but not yet real. They were going, the following autumn, to different universities, different cities. They understood this. They did not quite believe it. He remembered one specific evening. They had been in the park until it was nearly dark, and nobody had wanted to go home, and they had sat on the grass while the sky did its August thing of darkening very slowly, as if reluctant. One of them had said something about the next year, about how strange it would be. Someone else had said, "Let's not talk about that," and nobody had. They had sat in the park until the grass was damp, and they went home separately, by different routes, without arranging to meet the next day because they didn't need to. They always met the next day. This was summer. This was how it was. They did not know it was the last evening of that particular kind of together. Nobody knows that about evenings. You are inside them, and then you are past them, and then you name them. He still knew those 4 people. Their lives had diverged in the ways lives diverged, and then bent back toward each other in the way friendships bent. And they met now every year or 2 and talked about the things adults talked about. They did not talk about that summer, specifically, but sometimes when they were together, in the particular ease of people who knew each other at 17, he felt it in the room, the remaining warmth of that summer, which had not quite gone, which had simply changed its form. Story 11. The Letter She Wrote Herself. At 16, as part of a class exercise, Sophie wrote a letter to her future self. The teacher had said they would be sealed and sent in 10 years or at the end of school or something. Sophie could not remember the exact plan. What she remembered was the writing of it, the peculiar, slightly ridiculous exercise of addressing the future person she was going to be. She had written practical things. She had asked herself if she had done the things she intended to do, named some of them specifically, listed things with the confidence of someone who had not yet discovered how much of life was unplannable. She had also, at the bottom of the letter, she could still see her own handwriting, the looping 16-year-old handwriting that was different from her adult hand, written something that was less a question and more a statement, as if she had needed to say it to someone, and the only person available was herself. I hope you are not too hard on yourself. I think you will be, a bit. Try not to. She had found the letter in a box during a house move in her late 20s. She had sat on the floor of the spare room with it in her hands, surrounded by packing materials, and read it twice. She had been, by that point, quite hard on herself for some years. The 16-year-old had known, or had suspected, or had been worried enough about it to name it, which was its own kind of wisdom. The wisdom of a person who knows something about themselves and says so before it becomes confirmed. She thought about the gap between the girl who had written it and the woman reading it. Some of what the girl had planned had happened, some had not. The plans that had not happened were, she could see clearly from 28, not failures but simple divergences, the life going in a direction the plan hadn't anticipated, which was entirely normal and not the catastrophe she had sometimes treated it as. She kept the letter, she put it somewhere deliberate. She thought she would read it again in another 10 years, with whatever came after 28 had brought. She thought the 16-year-old had been, on the main point, right, and she was working on it. Story 12, When It Clicked. For the first 3 years of school, Theo had found reading hard. Not impossible, he had learned the mechanics, could decode the letters into words, could produce the expected output when asked to read aloud. But it had not been what it seemed to be for other children, some of whom appeared to find in books a place they wanted to go. He had watched this with some bewilderment. The books he had encountered had not been places he wanted to go. The teacher who changed this was not his class teacher, but the school librarian, a woman named Mrs. Gould, who had the quality, he understood now, of knowing what each child needed to find before they could find it themselves. She had given him, when he was 8, a book about trains. He had not been especially interested in trains, but the book, factual, detailed, full of diagrams and histories, and the particular biographical texture of machines that have existed for a long time, had done something that fiction had not yet done for him. It had given him information, real information, about something that was actually in the world. It had assumed he was intelligent and curious and had things to discover. It had trusted him. He had read it in 2 days. He had taken it back, and Mrs. Gould had asked what he thought, and he had told her at some length, and she had listened with the attention of someone who was interested rather than performing interest. Then she had given him another one, ships this time. He had discovered, in the reading of factual books, that he liked knowing things. That information was something he was hungry for, in a way he had not identified before, because he had not been given the right kind. This opened fiction, eventually, through stories in which things happened that were real enough to learn from. He became, over the following years, a reader. Not the kind who disappeared into books, but the kind who moved between them and the world, carrying what he found. He was a scientist now. He had been a reader for 30 years. Both things had begun in a library, with a woman named Mrs. Gould, and a book about trains. Story 13. The Thing About Being 11. Being 11 was, in Nadia's opinion, the most complicated age she had so far encountered, and she had a feeling it was going to be the most complicated age for some time. She was 11, so she was still inside it, which meant she could not yet have the adult perspective on it, the perspective that would arrive later and allow her to say, "Oh, that was a transition. That was the year things shifted." From inside it, it was just the year nothing was quite right. The year before had been straightforward by comparison. She had been 10, which was a clear number, a round number, a number that knew what it was. 11 was something else. Her body was doing things she had been told about in a class at school, and that had seemed, in the class, manageable as information, and had turned out to be more complicated as experience. Her friendships had a different texture. Something had become more fragile in them, more loaded, and she was not always sure how to navigate the new weight. Story 14. The Bicycle. She got the bicycle on a Tuesday in June, which was also the last day of school before the summer. It was second-hand, red with white handlebars, and it was waiting on the pavement outside the house when the school bus dropped her off. She saw it from the window of the bus and was off the bus before it had properly stopped, running down the path, her mother standing in the doorway with the particular expression of someone who had managed a surprise successfully. She already knew how to ride a bicycle. She had learned on a friend's bicycle 2 summers before, in the car park behind the church, going around in circles until she had it. But this bicycle was hers, and that was different. She rode it all that afternoon, down the road and back, down the road and down the lane that went along the edge of the field, which was longer and had a hill at the end that she had to walk up, and then came down fast with the wind in her face and her feet off the pedals. She rode until her legs ached and the light was going. That summer was the bicycle summer. She went everywhere on it. She went to friends' houses and to the shop and to the river path and up to the hill where you could see the whole valley if you climbed the last bit on foot and sat on the gate. She went out after breakfast and came back for lunch and went out again until dinner. Her mother stopped asking where she was going because the answer was always the same. Out, just out. She was 9 that summer and she did not know until much later that what she had been doing, riding her bicycle over the same roads in every variation of weather and mood, was experiencing a particular kind of freedom that had a specific age range and that she would not be inside of again. But she had been inside of it. That summer was in her still. Story 15. The Treehouse. Her father had been building the treehouse for 3 Saturdays, when she understood it was not going to be the treehouse she had imagined. The treehouse she had imagined was large and enclosed, with a proper door and windows and a rope ladder that you could pull up after yourself. The treehouse that was being built in the old apple tree at the bottom of the garden was a platform, a flat surface of wood nailed between 3 branches, with a railing on 2 sides and a gap on the other 2 where the ladder would go. Her father said, "That is the base. We build from here." They built from there. Over the following weekends, which extended into the autumn and then resumed the following spring because winter made the work too cold, she helped. She handed things up. She held nails while he hammered. She was consulted on decisions. Where should the window go? Should the roof slope 1 way or 2? What should they put on the floor? The treehouse, when it was finished in April of the following year, was not what she had originally imagined, but was something she had not imagined, and which was therefore better in the specific way that things you make are better than things you dream of. It smelled of sawdust and fresh paint. The floor was slightly uneven because the branch below it was slightly uneven. One of the windows was bigger than the other because they had run out of wood for the frame. She furnished it with a cushion, a blanket, a torch, and a biscuit tin. She spent most of that summer in it, reading, sleeping sometimes, lying on the floor looking at the canopy of the apple tree above the roof they had made, and listening to the tree move in the wind. Her father had done the structural work, she had done the rest. This division had felt right without either of them deciding it. Story 16. The Best Friend. She and Maya had been best friends since they were 6, which meant By the time they were 11, they had been best friends for what felt like the whole of their lives. This was almost true. There were faint earlier memories. Before Maya, before school, before the back gate between their gardens had been opened, because their mothers had discovered they were the same age and in the same class and lived 50 feet apart. But those memories were thin and uncertain. Maya was in all the clear ones. They had a signal, which was tapping on the back gate 3 times. 2 taps meant, "Are you there?" 3 taps back meant, "Come over." 1 tap meant, "Can't come out right now." This system had evolved over years and functioned without being discussed. They were different in most of the obvious ways. Maya was loud and quick and decisive. She was quieter and slower and changed her mind more. At school, they were sometimes in different groups. Maya moved easily through the class, collecting friends the way some people collected things, while she tended to be in one place with one person. Usually Maya, sometimes both. They argued, as all best friends argue, about things that did not matter, and occasionally about things that did. They had a falling out when they were 9, over something she could not remember, that lasted 4 days. 4 days was very long. On the 4th day she tapped 3 times on the gate, and Maya tapped 3 back, and that was the end of it. She did not have a word, at 11, for what Maya was to her. She knew that Maya knew things about her that no one else knew, and that she knew the same about Maya, and that this mutual knowledge was the thing, the ground under everything else, which she had never had to think about because it had always been there. Story 17. The Summer Reading. The library ran a summer reading challenge every year, and every year she entered it, and every year she read far more books than were required, and tried not to mention this because the last time she had mentioned it, a boy in her class had called her a swot in a way that was meant as an insult and had not entirely failed to land. The library was a 20-minute walk from home, past the newsagent and the post office and the park with the broken swing. She went twice a week on average, more if she finished her books quickly. The librarian knew her by name and by preference, and sometimes said, when she arrived, "I've put something aside for you," which was always right. Her reading was wide and without system. She read things because the covers interested her, or because a friend had mentioned them, or because she had read everything else on a particular shelf. She read series and standalones, stories and facts, things set in this world and things set in others. She was not a picky reader. She was a hungry one. That particular summer, she was 10, the summer before secondary school. She read 17 books in 8 weeks. She did not count them at the time. She counted them later when she found the list she had kept on the back of the challenge stamp card. 17 books. She could remember most of them, at least partly, the plot, or a character, or a single moment that had stuck. She had not known, at 10, that the summer before secondary school was the last summer she would spend entirely in that particular kind of freedom. Long days with no structure, the library twice a week, the particular quality of reading in the garden in July when the world was warm and unhurried, and she could read for 3 hours without looking up. She had not known, but she had been inside it fully, and that was what mattered. Story 18. What she knew about the dark. She was not afraid of the dark, which she had learned made her different from many of her friends. This was not bravery. She had been told that it was bravery, by friends who were afraid, and who seemed to think that the absence of their fear in her was the same as courage. She did not think it was. She simply did not find the dark frightening. It was just dark. What she did find frightening was the noise the radiator made when it came on at night. which was a clanking, uneven sound that she had never been able to make feel ordinary despite years of exposure. And she was frightened sometimes of the particular quality of silence in the house when everyone else was asleep and she was awake, which was different from ordinary silence and had something in it she could not name. She spent a lot of time awake when everyone else was asleep. This had been true as long as she could remember. She lay in the dark and listened to the house. She knew its sounds well: the central heating, the creak of the third stair when the wood contracted in cold weather, the distant sound of traffic that rose and fell and sometimes disappeared completely after midnight. She was not troubled by the wakefulness. It was simply the shape of her nights. She used it for thinking, or for the particular state between thinking and not thinking that happened when the house was quiet and there was nothing required of her. She had tried to explain this to her friend Chloe, who was frightened of the dark and who slept with a light on, and who could not understand how anyone would want to be awake in the dark by choice. She had not been able to explain it. Some things were just true for you and not for other people. She turned 10 in December. She lay awake the night before her birthday and listened to the house and thought about being 10, which felt significant and also exactly like being 9. Story 19. The piano. She stopped playing the piano at 13 and did not play again until she was 38. At 13, she had stopped because the exams had made it feel like work rather than music, and because there were other things: friends, the social architecture of secondary school, a self that was being constructed and that did not, at that time, include being someone who played the piano. At 38, she walked past a piano in a hotel lobby and sat down at it. She had not planned to. The lobby was empty in the early morning and the piano was a good one, an upright, well-maintained, with the particular sound of a piano that is played regularly. She sat on the bench and looked at the keys and put her hands on them. Her hands remembered. This surprised her. She had not thought about the pieces she had learned as a child for 25 years, and her hands went to them immediately. The first position, the familiar fingering for the only piece she had ever truly loved, a short piece by a composer she had adored as a child, and whose name she could still not spell. She played it slowly, because she was slow now and would not be fast again without practice, but she played it. She sat at that piano for 20 minutes in the empty hotel lobby. Then she got up and had breakfast. She bought an electric keyboard that week. She put it in the corner of the spare room and played it in the evenings, slowly, relearning. Her technique was gone. Her musicianship was not. The thing she had felt as a child in the music, the thing that had made her love it before the exams arrived, was still there, under 25 years of disuse. She was not trying to become what she had been at 12. She was trying to find out what she had become, and whether it included this. It did. Story 20. The neighborhood. She grew up on a street that was, to her, the entire world, until she was old enough to understand that it was not. It was a long street of terraced houses, brick and close together, with a small park at the far end that everyone called the Wreck, which was short for something she did not know for years. She knew every house on her side of the street and many on the other. She knew which had dogs and which had cats and which had the couple who argued loudly in summer when the windows were open. She knew the corner shop and the man who ran it, who gave her a penny sweet if she came on her own rather than with her parents, which she had never understood but accepted as one of the laws of the neighborhood. She spent her childhood largely outdoors. The street was safe enough, or was considered safe enough in the way of that time, and children moved through it with a freedom that did not require checking in every hour. She knew the other children on the street by name and by house and by family, and she spent time in most of those houses, and they spent time in hers. At 11, she started secondary school, which was a bus ride away, and the world extended. Friends from different streets, different ends of town. The rec became something she still went to but no longer thought of as the whole of outside. The street shrank to its actual size, one street among many, 30 houses among thousands. But it never became ordinary to her, the way things that expand beyond their original container do. She always knew that street from the inside. She could walk it in memory at any age, house by house, name by name. This is what a childhood does, she thought, when she was old enough to think about it. It gives you a particular patch of ground that you know completely. Everything else is learned from the outside. That first patch is known from within. Story 21. The Snow. The snow came in the night, and she was the first one to see it. She woke early, for no reason she could identify, and looked out the window, and the world was white. The street was white, the cars were white, the rooftops were white, and it was still coming down, large, quiet flakes settling onto the white that was already there. She had been 7 or 8, she had forgotten exactly. But she had not forgotten the particular feeling of that moment, alone in the quiet house, everyone else asleep, looking out at the white world. There was something about being the first to see it. The snow had happened, and she knew, and no one else did yet. She went back to bed and lay there, not sleeping, keeping the knowledge of the snow to herself for a while longer. She could hear the quiet of it from outside. The snow-dampened sound, she knew this without knowing she knew it, and the street was quieter than it ever was. Later, when her brother woke and came into her room and said, "It's snowing," she said, "I know, I saw it first." He did not believe her. He said she was making it up. She was not making it up, but she could not prove it. This is one of the things about first moments. They belong only to you, and you cannot transfer them or show them to anyone. You can describe them, but the description is always less. The actual thing, the white world before anyone else knew about it, the quiet house, the large, slow flakes, that existed only in the moment and then in her memory, which was also private and also hers. She still thought about it. 40 years later, at the first snow of the winter, she still felt something that she recognized, faintly, as the feeling of that morning. Story 22. The Report Card. She had always done well in school, and she had always felt slightly uneasy about this. Not guilty exactly. She worked hard, mostly. She paid attention. The good marks were not a surprise to her, but they were not the whole of the story either, and the story that the report cards told, conscientious, attentive, performs well above expectations, was a partial version of the person reading it. The partial version was true as far as it went. She was conscientious. She was attentive. She did perform well. What the reports did not capture was the thing she actually liked about school, which was not the performing well but the moments, specific and not always predictable, when something clicked and was suddenly clear. A historical cause and effect, a mathematical principle, the way a sentence turned. These moments were what she came for. The grades were the evidence that she had been present for them, not the point of being present. She was 12 when she had this thought in something like its full form, sitting in the car with her mother who was reading the report card aloud, with the particular maternal satisfaction of a woman whose daughter had once again done well. She was listening and not listening. She was thinking, "I did well. I also am not this." She did not say this. She was 12 and she did not have the language for it yet, and her mother's satisfaction was genuine and kind, and she did not want to complicate it. She carried the thought with her for a long time, in the way you carry things you cannot yet articulate, intact but without a frame. She found the frame later, in her 20s, when she had language for the difference between what you produced and what you were, and understood that the two were related but not the same. Story 23, The Argument. They argued every day that summer, she and her brother, in the particular way of siblings who spend too much time together in a house that is too small for both their sizes. They argued about the television, and about who had eaten the last of the cereal, and about whose turn it was to set the table. These were not interesting arguments. They were the noise that proximity made, the friction of two lives rubbing against each other in a confined space. The real argument happened in August. She could no longer remember what it was about, something small, probably, inflated to a size that required tears and a door being slammed, and a silence of 2.5 hours in which the house held them apart like magnets. She sat in her room, he sat in his. Their mother, who had learned over the years to let these things run their course, stayed downstairs. What ended it was both of them being hungry. She came downstairs, he came downstairs. They were in the kitchen simultaneously. He said something, she couldn't remember what, something neutral, something about whether there was any bread. And she answered, and the silence ended, and they ate toast, standing at the counter. This was the shape of most of their arguments, even then. Intense, and then over. The ending not marked or discussed, simply ceased. She was 13 that summer, he was 15. They were very different people who had been placed in the same family, which was how most sibling relationships worked, she thought, and which meant that what you shared was not similarity but origin. The same house, the same parents, the same kitchen where the arguments ended over toast. That was not nothing. It was, she thought, quite a lot. Story 24, The Secret. She and Priya had a secret for almost a whole year, which was a long time to keep a secret when you were 9. The secret was about the den. They had found it on the first Saturday of the summer holidays, when they had been exploring the patch of overgrown ground behind the supermarket car park that everyone used as a shortcut. The den was in the middle of a dense section of elder and hawthorn, a natural hollow in the bushes, big enough for both of them if they sat with their knees up, invisible from outside. They went back to it the next day and the day after, and it became their place. They brought things, a cushion each, a biscuit tin with a lid that they kept supplies in, a notebook that was supposed to be for a map of the area, but ended up being a record of things that had happened there, which was mostly them talking and eating biscuits and occasionally arguing about things. The keeping of the secret was not about excluding other people, exactly. It was about the place belonging to just the two of them, which required no one else to know about it. This was a logic that made complete sense to both of them without needing to be discussed. In September, they went back to school, and the den became a weekend thing, and then a less frequent thing, and then winter made it inhospitable, and by spring they were 11 and something had shifted. They went back once, in April, and it was still there, slightly smaller than they remembered, or perhaps they were slightly larger. And they sat in it for 20 minutes, and it was good. It was still good, but it was also slightly in the past. They did not go back after that. They kept the secret, though. There was no reason not to. The den was still there, for anyone who found it. Story 25, The Teacher. She had had many teachers, but only one whose name she still said to herself sometimes, years later, when she needed to remember something. The teacher was named Mr. Osei, and he taught English when she was 12. He was not particularly old. Looking back, she thought he was probably in his mid-30s, and he was not particularly striking in appearance, but he had a quality in the classroom that she had not encountered before and did not entirely encounter again, the quality of someone who was genuinely interested in what she thought. Not interested in the right answer, not interested in the answer that demonstrated she had read the text, interested in what she, specifically, made of it. He asked questions that did not have correct answers and waited, actually waited, for her to think. He did not fill the silence with hints. He let the silence be there and trusted her to fill it. She had not been a notably confident student before his class. She was adequate, careful, unlikely to cause trouble. In his class, she became something slightly different, someone who expected that her thoughts had value. This was not something he told her explicitly. It was something that happened as a result of being consistently treated as if it were true. She wrote him a letter when she was in her 30s, tracking him down through the school's old contact system, which took some effort. She told him what she had just described to you. She said, "You taught me my thoughts were worth having, and I wanted you to know that I have found this useful." He wrote back. He said he was glad. He said he remembered her. He said, and this was the part she thought about, that the students you remember are not always the loudest ones. Story 26. The Fair. The fair came once a year, at the end of July, and for the week before it she could think of almost nothing else. It set up on the recreation ground at the far end of town, arriving in trucks on a Monday and transforming the field by Tuesday evening into something with lights and noise and the particular smell of diesel and fried food that she associated with no other occasion, and which, encountered anywhere else, still brought the fair immediately to mind. She went on the Wednesday with her father, and on the Friday with her friends, and on the Saturday if there was any money left over. The Wednesday visit with her father had a particular quality. He held her hand on the bigger rides because she was scared and would not say so, and he bought her candy floss and did not make her share it, and he went on the waltzers with her even though they both knew it made him feel sick. The Friday visit was different, wilder and less supervised, the 7 of them moving through the fair in a pack, spending money badly, screaming on the rides, once losing track of one of them for 20 minutes and finding her at the hook-a-duck stall, entirely untroubled. The fair left on a Sunday morning, while most of the town was still asleep. You could wake up and it would be gone. The wreck returned to its ordinary self, only a few tire marks in the grass where the trucks had been. She found this sad every year and had found it sad as long as she could remember. But the fair came back, the next July. The same trucks, the same lights, the same smell. She had stopped going, eventually, when she was older and had somewhere else to be on Friday evenings. But for the years she went fully, and she gave it the attention it deserved, and it gave her in return the particular thing that fairs give, the feeling that ordinary life had briefly suspended its rules. Story 27. The Letter from Grandma. She had a letter from her grandmother that she had read so many times she knew most of it from memory. Her grandmother had written it when she was dying, which she had known she was doing, and had written it to her specifically, not a general letter to the family, but one addressed to her name, 8 years old, which meant she had been considered separately from the adults and from her cousins, singled out for a specific communication. The letter was not long. It was written on pale blue notepaper in her grandmother's handwriting, which was rounded and slightly uneven. It told her some things about her grandmother's life that she had not known, about growing up, about her own grandmother, about the town where she had been a girl. It said some things about what her grandmother hoped for her, which were not specific things, not professions or achievements, but qualities. That she would be kind, that she would pay attention, that she would not be afraid to take up the space she was entitled to. The last line was, "I have known you for 8 years, and I am very glad of every one of them." She had cried when she first read it, which was expected. She had cried again at 12, rereading it, which was less expected. She had read it again in her 20s, without crying, with a steadiness that felt like the right response to something that had been waiting for her to be ready. The letter was in a box where she kept things that mattered. She knew it was there. She did not read it often anymore. She carried it as she carried her grandmother, in the memory way, present but not constantly accessed, there when she needed it to be. Story 28, The Last Day of Primary School. It was the last day of primary school, and she did not want it to be. This surprised her, because she had been looking forward to secondary school for months. The bigger building, the different teachers, the sense of something new. But the last day had a feeling she had not anticipated. The corridors and classrooms she had spent 6 years in were the same as ever, and were also already gone, the way a thing can be present and already past simultaneously. They had a leavers assembly. They sang a song they had been rehearsing for 3 weeks. The head teacher said things about futures and journeys that were true in a general way, but did not quite touch the specific reality of this specific group of children leaving this specific school at this specific age. She sat with the people she had sat with for years and looked at the hall, the mural on the wall that had been there since her first year, the stage she had performed on, the windows that let in the afternoon light at the angle she knew exactly because she had looked at it every week. At the end of the assembly, everyone went outside and some people cried, which she had not expected, and one of her friends hugged her and said, "Secondary school is going to be brilliant," and she believed this and also found it beside the point. Walking home with her mother, she felt the particular feeling of something ending. Not regret, not sadness exactly, but the recognition that something had been real and was now complete. She had been at that school. She had spent 6 years of her life there. Whatever came next would be different and probably fine, but it would not be this. Her mother asked how she felt. She said fine, and she was fine. The fine and the feeling existed together, as they so often do. Story 29, The Dog They Didn't Get. The summer she was 10, she wanted a dog with a desire that was total and all-consuming, and which she communicated to her parents repeatedly across several months, with the patience of someone who knew that the campaign was long, but the goal was worth it. Her parents were not opposed in principle. They were opposed in practice. The flat was too small. No one would be home during the day. A dog required more than they could give it. These were reasonable objections, and she responded to each one with the specific counter-arguments she had prepared, which were detailed and not entirely wrong, and which her parents received with the care of people who wanted to say yes and could not. She did not get the dog. What she got instead was a compromise she had not asked for and did not initially want. She was allowed to walk the elderly beagle belonging to the woman 2 floors down on Saturday mornings for an hour. The beagle was named Herbert, and he was 11 years old, and he walked at a pace calibrated to his age, which was slower than she would have walked on her own, and faster than the woman could manage. He smelled of old dog, which was specific and not unpleasant, and he pulled on the lead in the direction of interesting smells and was not interested in hurrying past them. She walked Herbert every Saturday morning for almost 2 years. She came to know his preferred routes and his preferred smells and his particular way of looking at her when she said his name, which was not the wild enthusiasm of a young dog, but was attentive in its own way. When Herbert died, she cried. She had not expected to. He had not been her dog. But she had walked beside him for 2 years, across 100 Saturday mornings, and she had known him in the way you know animals you spend time with, which is its own kind of knowing. She still wanted a dog. When she was grown up and had her own place and her own mornings, she got one. She named him Herbert, which made her mother cry and which seemed right. Story 30. The End of Summer. The last day of the summer holidays always had a particular smell, which she could never quite identify. Not a real smell, probably. The smell of the last day was the smell of the summer that was ending, the school year that was about to begin, the specific emotional weather of a child who had been free for 6 weeks and was about to not be free in the same way. Something composed of cut grass and the residue of long, warm evenings and the faint anxiety of new school shoes that smelled of the shop. She always spent the last day in a particular way that she had not planned but that repeated itself. She went outside early, before anyone else was up, and she walked around the places she went in summer. Not to do anything, just to be in them one more time with the knowledge that tomorrow they would be the same but she would be different, because term would have started and the daily shape of her life would have changed. She walked to the rec, which was empty in the early morning. She sat on the swings for a while without swinging. She walked to the corner where Priya lived and looked at the house without knocking. She walked back home the long way. Then she went inside and got ready for the day and tried to be normal about everything. Her mother always noticed the mood of the last day and never remarked on it directly, which was the right thing to do. She made her favorite dinner. They watched something together in the evening. Her brother was louder than usual, which he sometimes was when he was nervous, though he would not have said he was nervous. She went to bed early and lay awake for a while. The summer was still happening outside, still warm, the windows open, the sound of people in gardens. By tomorrow evening it would be different. Right now it was still itself. She let it be itself for as long as she could stay awake. Then she slept. Story 31. The First Phone. She got her first phone at 12, which was slightly later than most of her friends, and she remembered the exact evening. Her parents on the sofa, the box on the coffee table, her father explaining what was and was not allowed on it, with the thoroughness of someone who had prepared this speech. The phone was not a sophisticated device by the standards of even a few years later, but it was a phone and it was hers, and it meant she was contactable, which felt at 12 like the threshold of something. She used it at first to text her friends, long, slightly formal text messages that cost per character, which she learned quickly, and which taught her a form of concision she had not needed before. She used it to send photographs of things she found interesting, a strange cloud, a street she liked, the cat. She was not allowed to take it to bed. This had been one of the rules from the speech on the sofa, and it was the rule she found most difficult and most consistently kept, because her parents checked and she was not yet at the age when the cost of breaking a rule outweighed the cost of keeping it. The rule was kept. She thought about those years sometimes, now that the phone was a different thing entirely, now that it was an extension of her consciousness as much as her hand. She thought about the interval between getting the phone and the phone becoming constant, when the phone was still a tool rather than a habit. That interval was brief. She hadn't known, at 12, that it was about to close. Story 32. The Prize. She won the school writing competition at 10 and did not win it at 11 or 12 or 13. And the winning at 10 had been better for her than winning every year would have been, though she had not understood this at the time. At 10, she had written a story about a dog who could speak but chose not to, which she submitted with the confidence of not expecting anything. When she was called to the front of the assembly to receive the certificate, she was surprised in a way that was visible to everyone in the hall, which was embarrassing and also the best part. At 11, she had submitted something she was proud of and had not won, and at 12, she had tried harder and still not won, and by 13, she had decided to stop entering because the not winning was making the writing feel like a competition rather than a thing she did for its own reasons. This was the useful thing. She had won once, which proved to her that the writing could be good enough to be recognized, and then she had not won, which proved that recognition was not the same thing as the writing and was not guaranteed, and from the combination of these two proofs she had arrived, by 13, at a relationship with writing that was independent of whether other people found it good. She still wrote at 43. She had been published, occasionally. She had not been published more often than that. The relationship with writing she had established at 13, that it was something she did, not something that proved her worth, had held. The dog who could speak but chose not to. She remembered the story clearly. She still thought it was a reasonable idea. Story 33. The River. The river ran through the edge of the town where she grew up, and she had spent most of her childhood summers along it, in the ways that children spend time along rivers, paddling in the shallows, building dams that didn't hold, looking at things under rocks. The river was not dramatic, it was not fast or deep or wide. It was a moderate river, brown-green, with banks that varied between muddy and grassy, and with areas where the older children swam in summer and the younger ones watched from a safe distance and planned to swim when they were older. She had a particular section of the river she thought of as hers, which was hers only in the sense that she went there often, and no one else she knew went there specifically, a bend where the bank was flat and grassy, and where a large willow trailed in the water, and where the light, in the afternoon, came through the willow in a way that made the water look different from how it looked anywhere else. She had gone there to think, as a child, without knowing she was going there to think. She had gone there when she was upset and when she was bored, and when she wanted to be somewhere that was not anywhere in particular. The river had received her on all of these occasions with the equanimity of water. It was doing what it always did, going in the direction it went, indifferent to her presence in the best possible way. She took her own children to the river once, when they were young, to show them the willow. The willow was still there. The light still came through it in the way she remembered. Her children were interested for about 15 minutes, and then wanted to look at things under rocks, which was correct and which she allowed. Story 34. The Night We Stayed Up. The night they stayed up was a Friday in August when she was 13, at her friend Lydia's house, and they had decided to stay up all night, which sounded straightforward and turned out to be different from straightforward. The plan was to watch films and talk and eat things and see the sunrise. Lydia's parents were away. Her older sister was nominally in charge and had made clear she was going to bed at 11 and was not interested in their plans. The first part was easy. They watched a film and ate crisps and talked about various things with the freedom of girls who had the house to themselves and no particular need to be quiet. At midnight, the energy shifted slightly. At 1 in the morning, it shifted again. At 2, they were aware of the time in a way they had not been at 11. The difficult hours were 3 and 4. Not frightening, just long. They played card games they couldn't quite concentrate on. They looked out the window at the garden, which was very dark and quiet. At 3:30, one of them said, "Do you think we should just sleep for a bit?" The other said, "No, we said we'd stay up." They did not sleep. At 5, the sky began to change. They moved to the garden and sat on the damp grass and watched it, the darkness becoming less dark, becoming gray, becoming the particular pale color of very early morning, and then, slowly, the color. They were tired and slightly strange from the night, and the sunrise was beautiful in that slightly hallucinated way that beautiful things are when you are very tired, and they sat and watched it without saying much. She thought of it sometimes, that specific quality of the early morning after a sleepless night, which she had only recreated a few times as an adult, and which never had quite the same strangeness as it had at 13 in Lydia's garden. Story 35. The Thing About Being 12. Being 12 was the strangest year, she would tell people later, when she was old enough to say it. Stranger than 11, stranger than 13, stranger than any year until much later when things got complicated again, but in different ways. At 12, she was in the middle of things. Too old for the things she had been and not yet whatever she was becoming. She could feel both edges, what she had been, which was receding, and what she was moving toward, which was not yet visible. The middle was where she lived, and it had a particular texture, heightened self-consciousness, the sense of being watched even when no one was watching, the way things that had not mattered suddenly mattered. She had liked things, at 12, with a completeness she didn't always bring to things later. The books she read that year she read completely, inside them, in a way that was harder to achieve as an adult. The music she discovered felt like it had been made specifically for her, which was absurd, and was also true in the way that things were true at 12. The friendships were intense in ways she had not found before and has not quite found since. The specific intensity of adolescent friendship, which is friendship practiced without irony, without self-protection, with the full force of a self that has not yet learned to manage its own exposure. She was glad she had been 12. It was not a comfortable year. The discomfort of it had been the right kind, the kind that made something, that was the making of something, though you did not know what while it was happening. Story 36. A Long Friendship. She and Priya had been friends for 34 years, which meant Priya had known her longer than almost anyone alive. She thought about this sometimes, the accumulation of 34 years, the sheer quantity of time that had passed while they had continued to be friends. They had been 7 when they met. They were 41 now. Between 7 and 41, their lives had been mostly separate. Different schools after primary, different cities for university, different countries for a few years in their 20s. But the friendship had continued, which was not something that could be taken for granted, and which she did not take for granted. They had kept it up by effort, phone calls that were occasionally inconvenient and made anyway, visits that required planning, the maintenance of a connection that could have lapsed at any one of several points and had not lapsed because both of them had chosen, each time, to maintain it. Priya knew things about her that no one else alive knew, things from childhood, things said during difficult periods, things she had thought and felt at ages when she was not yet fully herself. This was the particular quality of a very long friendship, the accumulated knowledge. Priya held a version of her that predated every other version people knew. She held the same of Priya, the 7-year-old on the first day of school, and the 14-year-old who was difficult to be close to for reasons that were clear in retrospect, and the 23-year-old making everything harder than it needed to be, and Priya now, 41, good to know, exactly herself. Story 37. The Field. Behind the school was a field that technically belonged to the school, but that she had always thought of as hers, in the way that children claim spaces with repeated use. The field was large and slightly uneven and was used for sports on weekdays, which meant that on weekends and in summer evenings it was empty, and empty was what she wanted it for. She went there to do nothing specific. She lay in the grass and looked at the sky. She walked the perimeter for no particular reason. She sat against the fence at the far end and read. The field had a smell in summer that was specific to itself and to summer, warm grass. The particular smell of ground that has been in sun all day, something animal from the rabbits she occasionally saw at the far end. She associated this smell with the particular freedom of being in a large space alone, which was different from being in a small space alone and different again from being in a large space with other people. She had needed the field more in some years than others. At 11, when the social world of school was complicated, she had needed it most. She had gone there after school on the days when the complications were too much, and she had sat against the fence and let the quiet of the large space replace the noise of the day. The field did not solve anything. She had never expected it to solve anything. It gave her an hour of the particular quality of the empty field in the late afternoon, which was enough to return with something restored that had been used up, and this was what she needed from it. Story 38. Being good at something. She discovered at 9 that she was good at swimming, which was the first time she had been definitely good at anything, and the feeling of it did not leave her for years. Not good in the way of a future in it, she was not that good. She was good in the sense of faster than the others, comfortable in the water in a way that was visible from outside, able to do the things the teacher asked, with a facility that the teacher noticed and mentioned. The noticing had been important. She was a child who had been noticed for being careful and quiet and reliable, which were good things to be noticed for, but were different from being noticed for being good at something. The swimming teacher had said, "You're a natural." She had not known what natural meant in this context, but had understood it as something positive and had taken it with her. She swam through her teens in the club, training twice a week, competing occasionally. She did not pursue it seriously past 16, when other things took priority. But the 9-year-old version of herself who had first been told she was a natural in the water, that discovery had shaped something. She had known, from then on, that there were things she could be good at. This sounds small. It was not small. She had not known it before with this directness. After the swimming she knew, there will be things you can do well. You will find them. You don't have to be good at the things that are hard for you. You can be good at the things that are not. Story 35. The Thing She Kept. She had kept one thing from her childhood bedroom when her parents finally sold the house. A small ceramic dog that had sat on the windowsill for as long as she could remember. It was not beautiful. It was slightly chipped on one ear. She had not thought about it consciously for years at a time, but when she stood in the empty room for the last time and looked at the windowsill, it was the only thing she wanted. She had it now on her own windowsill. It looked different there, older, simpler, slightly out of place among adult things. She did not mind. It was a fragment of a room she would not see again, and having it meant the room was not entirely gone, which was the most she could reasonably ask for.